Hello and welcome to the Amazing Studios Production Podcast. My name is Peter Scheibner.
And I'm Cliff Bumgardner.
Cliff, what have you been up to?
It's a good week. This week is a little bit calmer than what we've been up to lately.
Yeah, for anybody who's been listening to a previous couple of weeks and following us online, it's been crazy, but this week's been a little bit slower.
It's nice.
It's actually like we come into work at a normal time and we leave at a normal time.
We get home and have dinner with our families, and it's...
So what have you been doing? I assume this thing we call, free time?
Yeah.
Have you been using that?
Yeah, somewhat. Over the weekend, I had a good buddy I hadn't seen in a while, Tavis. He's an actor out in L.A., and he moved to L.A. in March, and I hadn't seen him since. So he came back out, and we got to hang out, and then he came into the studio on Monday and helped us with a few things.
Yeah, I got to meet Tavis, and I'm curious. He's pretty trim. Has he always been that trim?
Yes.
Yeah?
As long as I've known him.
Yeah, and see, whenever you talk about him, you always talk about him as almost the subject is Tavis the nerd.
Yeah, he is.
And then I met him, and it's not Tavis the nerd. It's Tavis the, hello, I'm Tavis trim cut chiseled chin.
It's a good facade.
Yeah, he plays it well.
To hide the gooey, nerdy center.
Yeah. Well, I hope to eventually know him well enough to know that gooey, nerdy center. But right now, all I got to see was, man, that guy's actually almost a little bit intimidating.
Just get him talking about Star Wars, and it's all downhill from there.
That's a good conversation point for next time.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's launch right into it. What have you been watching?
We've mentioned this on previous episodes. We talked about Mission Impossible, the new Mission Impossible film, a month or so ago, and we have a guy here in the studio, Jeremiah, who is a Tom Cruise nut.
Who, to be fair, we tried to get him on the podcast.
Yes.
And he's so much busier than we are.
He has actual work.
Yes. He looked up.
Yeah.
And then looked right back down.
So, but he's a Tom Cruise nut, and he'd been talking to me about Oblivion. I had never seen Oblivion. Tom Cruise movie came out, I believe, in 2013. Sounds about right.
Yeah, keep talking.
Tom Cruise, Morgan Freeman, a lot of great actors in that film. But he'd been talking to me about it, telling me I needed to see it. I just took me a while. It was on the list, and finally over the weekend I watched it, and I loved it.
And it was 2013.
Sweet. Can you leave that up? Because I need to make a reference here in just a moment.
Please.
So, but yeah, I loved Oblivion. I thought it was a lot of fun. It has a very 70s imagining of what the future will be like. It's dystopian without always feeling dirty and gritty and grimy and all that. It's just really cool. It's a fun movie. It reminds me a lot of The Matrix. Not so much in beat by beat plot points, but in kind of the spirit of the plot of that film. And it also shares with The Matrix that it is impossible to tell anybody what it's about. It's one of those things you just have to go
right
watch.
Without giving away the ending, you really can't tell what the plot is.
And there's about 3 or 4 twists between the beginning and the ending, so it's really difficult to talk about. But I thought it was a blast. And one thing that was really interesting to me as I watched the film, and this is what I teased you with this the other day, but I told you I was going to save it for the podcast. As I was watching the film, I kept thinking, this feels like if David Fincher shot a sci-fi movie. It felt like his style of camera work.
Now I'm intrigued.
Yes. And the whole time that just kept ringing in the back of my head. So when the movie was over, I looked up the DP. The DP is a gentleman who I didn't immediately recognize his name, but he's actually, I believe, an Oscar winner for Life of Pi. Wonderful cinematographer. So I started kind of diving into his IMDb, and here's the amazing thing. How he kind of got his start was as a gaffer and an extra photographer on a number of David Fincher films.
Huh.
He's the DP, in fact, of The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he was Fincher's DP then?
On that one film, yeah.
Yeah.
And on, I believe it was Fight Club, he was the gaffer. On Seven, he did additional photography. He did a number of things. So he actually is in that camp. My eyes didn't lie to me. He kind of has come up in that world.
Does that make you feel smart?
Guys, it did. It actually made me go, oh, I know what I'm talking about for once, because that never happens. But that was interesting to see that style, and it speaks to what Fincher and his whole group have really created. That you can watch a completely different film and go, yeah, I think this is probably somebody from that world, and it turns out to be.
I had one of those moments the other day. I was driving back from a shoot with Brandon, our producer, and we were talking about Tom Cruise, ironically enough.
TC.
And we were talking specifically about Top Gun. And he raised the question, who directed Top Gun? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, I think Jerry Bruckheimer did it. And I had in the back of my head, Jerry Bruckheimer doesn't direct, he produces. And I'm thinking, I don't know. And I said these words come out of my mouth. I don't know who directed it, but whoever directed it must have been the same person that did Days of Thunder, because those movies are identical. And he was like, oh, I've never seen Days of Thunder. I was like, oh, it's a little known seen Tom Cruise film. And as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, wow, those really are remarkably similar visual films.
Yeah.
Well, I look it up. Turns out they were both directed by Tony Scott. Same director and produced by Jerry Bruckheimer. So he got some credit for that.
You guys double teamed that one.
Right. And so it's interesting because you can see artists' work carried from one to the other. And especially when films are close together, like you would have seen with Days of Thunder and Top Gun, which were I think 4 years apart.
Yeah.
You're going to see a lot of similarities.
It was even more amazing to me with Oblivion being that's such a different film. There was no relation whatsoever on the surface to Fincher, to anybody in his camp, but it was still obvious. And it was that what got me was what kind of sold it was the camera omniscience. The camera is always
it just kind of moves.
Well, it's exactly where it needs to be every time. It is the camera is never catching up to the action. The action is playing out for the camera. Is what I kept noticing, and also that I think the first half of the film there's no handheld.
Yep.
All that kind of stuff really feels like Fincher. So it was neat to make that connection. But yeah, I thought it was a blast. If you like sci-fi, there's a lot to love in Oblivion. It has sci-fi tropes. And it has that kind of knack of where it doubles back on itself and keeps twisting and things like that I understand why some people got frustrated with it. There's a lot of talk I was reading online. The ending is very contentious. A lot of people say that they, in the movie, having no clue what the actual plot was. I didn't have that problem.
No, I felt like I got it pretty well.
Yeah, first watch, I thought I got it. I thought it was explained pretty well.
However, the actual plot of the movie doesn't start until like the last 20 minutes of the film.
Right. Yeah, it's basically the lead character discovering the plot of the movie. Is essentially
right. The plot's been going on, but you don't realize it's been going on.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm reading here. Their explanation says so little about it. The IMDb, because you really can't say it. And it's a veteran assigned to extract Earth's remaining resources begins to question what he knows about his mission and himself.
Yeah.
I mean, that's about as obligatory write-up as you can have, but you can't say anymore.
Right.
Because you can't reference any of the original twists because they're irrelevant, and you can't reference the last 20 minutes because that gives away the whole film.
Right. So, yeah. But if you're listening, you haven't watched the movie, and you enjoy sci-fi, I highly recommend checking it out.
It is a visually stunning film, too.
Oh,
so if you're Brian French and you're watching, this is a film for you. Go watch Pretty.
That's Brian the intern, for those of you who have been following the podcast.
Yeah.
He was on there a few weeks ago.
He doesn't care about story, loves Pretty. This is a film for him.
So what have you been watching, Peter?
Actually, we've been watching Chef's Table on Netflix. You and I sat down a while ago and we watched one episode of
with
that.
Brian, oddly enough. Funnily enough, you mentioned Brian.
With Brian. We should check up on him, make sure he's still alive.
Yeah.
We kind of released him into the world, and that's it.
We released him into the big bad world of Bob Jones University.
Yes, that is. It's actually a small world. It's kind of a bubble of sorts. At any rate, Chef's Table Chef's Table for me, it's kind of the marriage of perfect documentary and perfect visuals. The stories themselves are rich, and it's about things that you may not necessarily care about.
Yeah.
I don't really give a crap about Parmesan cheese. But I watched a documentary about a guy named Massimo who lives in Modena, in a place in Italy I've never even heard of, and runs a restaurant where he has a dish that is called Oops, I Broke the Tart.
Yeah.
And he talks about Parmesan with so much passion, I care.
He could have an entire podcast about Parmesan.
He could, because he feels that passionately about it. And it makes me care. And that's good documentary. That's good storytelling. And then they pair it with these stunning visuals of food that feel fresh.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like your standard product, but it also doesn't feel like your standard documenting.
Right.
It's this marriage of the two, and you and I were commenting before the podcast about their use of slow motion and how they take the mundane, but all of a sudden they shoot it in slow motion. They were shooting on a dragon. I looked it up, and they take this stunning 6K slow motion, and it just all of a sudden feels beautiful. Something that wouldn't necessarily be that interesting in regular speed becomes incredibly interesting in slow motion, and they did that beautifully throughout all the episodes. if you're going to watch it, the first episode is by far the best. But there's something to be gathered from every single one, and there wasn't one I didn't enjoy. But the one with Massimo was special.
He's such a great character. I also love how they integrate a lot of run and gun style shooting in with incredibly produced, high quality motion control and slow mo and all these big things, and then they'll cut to just a very simply handheld shot scene, and it really makes it feel grounded. It's a great series.
Yeah. So Chef's Table, for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's on Netflix, only on Netflix.
Have you seen Hero Dreams of Sushi?
I actually have. I've seen most of it. I haven't seen the whole thing, but
I still
same
haven't
guy.
watched it.
Same guy.
Yeah.
And you'll see a lot of visual similarities. He shot Hero Dreams of Sushi, and that led to the contract for Chef's Table, which was it's basically taking that same concept and just making it bigger.
And I've heard Hero is amazing.
Oh, visually stunning.
Awesome. Yeah, I need to put that on my list.
Yeah, it's worth it. And honestly, for anybody who doesn't, if you are a filmmaker, I make a point to watch a documentary a month. Period. And sometimes I'll do more, but I discipline myself because it's easy to fall into I want to be entertained.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to watch filler movies, or I'm going to watch Fincher because he's great at his craft and it's entertaining.
Right.
Watch a documentary and force yourself. And I'm not talking about turning on Discovery Channel. I'm talking about real meaty produced documentary work. The stuff that you're going to find, honestly, Netflix has a ton of it. They have become a great house for these documentaries, but go through and watch some.
May I present you with a challenge?
Please.
For your next documentary, it is not on Netflix, unfortunately, but you can find it dirt cheap on, I believe, Amazon. Watch Resurrect Dead, the story of the Toynbee tiles. One of the most riveting documentaries I've ever seen. The story behind how it was made is perhaps even better than the documentary itself. I was it played at Full Frame Film Festival in Durham, North Carolina, 4 or 5 years ago now, and I was there, and the director was there, and I saw a lot of great documentaries that weekend. None of them actually had people on the edge of their seat the way that one did. There are moments in that documentary where you feel yourself scooching forward, leaning on your knees, waiting to find out what's about to happen. It's truly phenomenal. I think you'd really enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Honestly, it was a documentary that inspired me to make more documentary because I was a hardcore. I'm a narrative guy. That's all I'm going to do. But then I saw Food Inc. And that's the first documentary I ever saw that changed my mind about something, made me question previously held beliefs about something, and I realized the power of really well done documentary. And Food Inc. isn't perfect, but it's really well done.
Yeah.
Amazingly, it didn't win the Academy Award that year.
What was it up against that year? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I know the year before was the year that it went to An Inconvenient Truth, which is a great example of a horrible documentary. I mean, it was basically a glorified PowerPoint. And it was up against some incredible documentaries, but that was very much a political statement by the Academy.
Yeah.
If you've seen, have you ever seen An Inconvenient Truth? Oh my word. It's like, take a TED Talk, but take all the cool factors out of it. Okay? Take PowerPoint. Nothing else.
Wow.
Oh, wait, there's some shots of Al Gore walking down a stream. They weren't well shot. It was like a mini DV cam.
Wow.
Yeah. It was horrible.
Huh.
Like the same year, that was the same year that the first, oh, shoot. I'm trying to... it was the first documentary that referenced Banksy. Came out.
Exit the Gift Shop?
No, that was the second one, which is the one everybody knows about.
Yeah.
But I mean, just incredible work came out that year, and somehow that one won. Sorry, that's a soapbox for me.
We're getting on a slight tangent, but I do want to mention one of my all-time favorite documentaries is Restrepo.
Oh, that's on my list. I
have it on DVD. You need to borrow it.
Can I borrow that?
Yeah. I'll tell you, it's not an easy watch. There are times when you actually feel like you want to turn it off, but it's worth watching. It's a really, really powerful piece of filmmaking.
Okay. Yeah, I will. I'll sit down and watch that.
Awesome.
Bring that in tomorrow if you can.
For sure.
All right. Well, let's move into our segment this week. This week we're going to be talking about editing.
Yes.
You recently published an article.
Yes.
You can find it on our website, on the blog. You can also find it, I believe we started a Medium channel.
Yeah, you can go to amazingstudiosinc.com, click on the blog, and you'll see the post there. And also, all of us in the studio are developing our own channels on Medium, and we're opening a publication, an Amazing Studios publication on Medium, where you can go and read all of our blog posts. Mm-hmm. As we mentioned before, Jeremiah, our animator, has a blog post up there right now about designing for motion graphics. And then this week, my post came out as the first in a series called Editing, the Art of Organization.
Yeah, and if you ever want to follow up on those blogs, I mean, you can follow us on Twitter at Amazing Studios 1. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, just Amazing Studios. It gets shared out to all those.
Yep.
And a great way to follow these articles. But you were talking in the article about how editing is really the art of organization.
Right.
Talk me through a little bit about your process as the editor here at Amazing Studios.
Right. Well, this is actually something I've come to over a lot of time. I've been editing really longer than I've been doing most anything in film except for writing. And I'm a pretty organized person, just personally. And
for anybody who doesn't know, anal is actually a better word.
Yeah, particular. How about that?
Yeah,
say particular.
I'll give you particular anal.
So I had always incorporated a lot of organizational techniques into my edits and different things that I had done, and I found myself being drawn to ways to best organize and edit, because what I hate more than anything, and I hate this in all aspects of life, but perhaps nowhere more than in editing, is I hate being slowed down because I can't find something. That kills me the most. If I can't find a shot, if I can't find a moment, I can't find a certain file, and it's always going to happen in that moment where you're at your most creative and you're nailing it, and you have the sequence together in your head, and you just need this one file to complete it. That's going to be the moment you can't find it, and that always really bugged me. So I really worked on organization in my edits, and then as I started doing that, I also started to realize how editing is itself, the true craft of it, is really about organization. Because when the footage comes to me as an editor, truthfully, it's meaningless. It's shots, it's audio, it's a bunch of pictures and a bunch of sounds.
Maybe some graphics.
Yeah, and by themselves, on their own, they don't tell a story. There's nothing there. It's only when they're organized in a right manner that we recognize as being a film, as being a story, that they have impact. So really, organization is the foundation of editing. And that's what I talk a little bit about in this first article. The article mainly focuses on our file structure we use here at the studio, my file structure that I implement inside of Premiere, and then a couple of techniques that I use using sequences in Premiere. And also, when I say sequence, that's the Premiere name, but also timelines, that thing with the playhead, whatever you want to call it. Some techniques that I use to keep myself organized. And in the future, I'm going to expand on that. And what we can talk a little bit more about here today is how organization goes outside of just the nuts and bolts and actually affects you creatively and how you can best tell a story.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that's I think going to be something our audience is going to pick up on is that we do use Premiere here, but different editors handle media differently. Like, for instance, Premiere, you import your media. It doesn't move it for you.
Right.
It's going to leave it right where you put it. And so having that organization file structure is going to be incredibly important, because you need to be able to consistently go back and find your footage across projects and over a great period of time. What about ones like, for instance, Final Cut X or Avid, that when you ingest your media, it's going to ask you, or it's going to want to move that media into its hierarchy? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, really, it comes down to finding what works for you. Every system is different, and like you said, we work primarily in Premiere, so that's kind of where I've developed my headspace for editing. That's the tool that I use most often. But if you're in another application, it's finding within your footage, within the way you organize your footage, just figuring out how does your brain work, how do you work in editing, how does your workflow work, and then figuring out ways to improve that through things like folders and bins and labeling. Labeling is a big thing. I didn't talk about this much in the blog, but labeling your shots. Pretty much every editor that I'm aware of now allows you to label your shot, make notes on your shot, mark a shot as a select, as a no good, as what have you. And taking the time to go through and do that can really speed you up down the road. But again, it's just about what works for you. I tend to not go through and add metadata to every shot, because it would be a ton of time. And for most of the projects that we do, there's really no need. I don't need to know where all of my close-ups are in one go. Generally, the amount of footage we're working with, it's pretty easy to find. So things like that. But finding, and one thing I talk about a lot is that any sort of organizational structure has to be designed in such a way that it can expand and contract. So for your project, for your workflow, for that particular, for a particular piece of footage, you have to make sure that you're leaving yourself room that as your edit grows, as time goes on, that you can keep everything organized and that you're preparing yourself and you're not limiting yourself right out of the gate by the way you organize your stuff. So it's really subjective at the end of the day, but just taking the time to really think about it and then deciding how it can apply to you, I think can really, really help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my background is, I was an editor before I was anything else. I think a lot of people get their start there, and it's a great place to get your start because, even now in my role as DP, I think in editing terms. Mm-hmm. I think in sequence, and I think in cuts, and I think in direction, which really helps me as I design a scene. Is to be keeping that edit in mind. Cliff, let's kind of address for our audience a little bit of your process from ingest to final draft. Yeah. What does that look like, and how does that structure help you to move through it cleanly?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, usually the way we're lucky here that we're small enough that I'm frequently in pretty much every production meeting, and a lot of the time I'm on set. A lot of the time I'm working a second camera or I'm doing sound or something like that. We have a great environment here that allows us to all be involved on projects. So frequently my edits start in the field. Honestly, I'm watching a shot. We'll talk about a sequence, and we'll know pretty much how we're going to handle something.
I'll kind of express to you my desire for the footage,
right? Exactly.
Where I want it to go.
So our process starts a lot earlier than I think it does for a lot of editors. But let's say there are projects where you just come back to the studio, you have a bunch of cards, and I have to start fresh. And I don't know really, I know a cursory kind of explanation of what the project is, but I haven't seen the footage. I don't know what the shots are. I don't know how the sequencing is laid out. So for me, I really like to take my time when I'm ingesting. I take all the footage, goes directly into the file structure, and again, you can see photos, screenshots of our file structure on the blog. But all the footage goes into the file structure, and step one is everything is organized. I don't move on until every file, every image, every graphic that we already have, every piece of audio, everything is in. That allows me to stay organized and stay smart and make sure that I can then give you the cards back and say you're clear to format these, and we're not going to lose everything. Mm-hmm. If you start jumping around and you say, well, I can import a couple of cards and then I'll open Premiere and I'll pull them into Premiere and then I'll go back, you're going to get confused. So I do all the importing at once if there's any way I can. Sometimes projects spread out over several days and we can't do that, but for the most part, I try to do all of my ingest at one time. Then I bring everything into Premiere at one time. And again, this can be true for any editor that you use. Editors or editing applications, nonlinear editors differ in the way their particulars work, but for the most part, the ideas are the same. The thought process is the same. So I then bring all the footage into Premiere, and everything gets organized one more time. Everything goes back into, I have a system of bins. Again, there are screenshots of this online. I have a system of bins and a structure that everything goes into. So every file is accounted for, everything in its place kind of deal. And then when the actual process for me of looking through the footage starts, I pull everything down. I hate having stuff living in bins. If it's living in a bin, it's dead. So I'll pull everything down. It can stay in the bin for reference, but everything gets pulled down into a sequence, either a B-roll sequence, an interview sequence, selects, whatever. I just pull it down, and I use a sequence like a palette that I can get in, cut, work things around, do scratch cuts, whatever. And I'm not, because of the magic of non-destructive editing, I'm not messing up my raw files. So everything gets pulled down. It gets out where I can see it, where I can feel it. And I'll go through at that point, and it depends. We have a project right now that is probably an hour and a half of pure B-roll that I was cutting today.
Pure interview.
Oh, there's one of this pure interview, but the other one, the one we just sent out,
that one
is about an hour and a half of just B-roll that was shot over a period of a month, month and a half, as something was being built. So we had tons of footage. So I'll often organize I'll organize the footage into little scenes. Wherever I know that these are going to be edited together, they'll go in their own sequence. They'll be edited, or they'll be all kind of grouped together as a scene. That allows me to scrub through, see everything I've got, know where everything is, and view every shot very, very quickly. Then when the actual editing process starts, I'll create my main rough cut sequence. We label our rough cuts with each, for each revision. So we always start with rough cut 1.0. And then I use a technique that's come to be known as the pancake timeline. There was an editor, he has a blog, and his name escapes me at the moment, but he dubbed it the pancake timeline, but it's a technique that people have been using forever. The editors of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo utilized this because they had hundreds of hours of footage that they had to go through and find the best shots. And all a pancake timeline is laying two timelines or two sequences on top of one another in your edit. Again, you can find this stuff. If you go on Google, there's a great blog post about how to do this. There's actually some templates. So if you aren't quite sure how to get your Premiere project or whatever set up, there's some templates you can download. But it allows you to stack two or more timelines on top of one another so that when you're dragging footage, you're just dragging in between timelines. Nothing's getting deleted, nothing's getting permanently moved, but allows you to really get in and feel it in a kind of a tactile way. You're not sitting there. I hate the kind of editing where you're sitting there hitting a button for insert and a button for overwrite. I don't feel like I have control over the footage when I'm doing that. So I'll often utilize the pancake timeline to actually do my edits, especially with documentary where you're editing a ton of B-roll in or something like that, to actually get in and do the edit.
Yep.
And then our edits go through any number of revisions. I mean, ideally, we like to have 3. We like to have a rough cut. We get reviews on the rough cut. We polish that up. It becomes what we call a draft final. Draft final goes back out to client. We get the final reviews on that. We come back and we polish it out and finish it up for a final. Now, I mean, it's art, so it always tends to go through more than that. And that a big part of staying organized at this stage is copying everything. Duplicate your sequences. If you make any change to a cut, duplicate it and do it in a new cut. Label it. Like I said, we start with 1.0. The next cut is going to be 1.1, and we're going to go from there.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen often, but every now and then we have to go back to a previous cut.
Yeah.
They'll make a recommendation, hey, try this. We'll go and do it, and they'll be like, you know what? I don't like it. Go back to what you had.
I've got one on my plate this afternoon where the client wanted to see it condensed even more, saw it condensed and said, oh, maybe it's going to be better if there's a little bit more to it. Had I not duplicated my sequences every time, I would be in trouble right now because I'd have to go through and try to pull everything back out and it'd just be a nightmare. But just by simply taking the time to duplicate my sequence every time, we don't have to worry about that. I can go back, I can look at everything in its natural state, grab cuts out of that, again, utilize the pancake timeline to drag from sequence to sequence and keep things fast and keep things creative.
Yeah, and every major editor has a shortcut for that. Usually it's copy paste.
Yep, copy paste or just drag and drop.
Yep.
I mean, I tend to, like I said, I'm not much of a keyboard shortcut guy. I tend to love just to drag and drop. It feels tactile. But yeah, and at that point, I mean, for us here, our final export comes out of Premiere. Sometimes it'll be After Effects, sometimes it'll be various other applications, but most of the time, our color grading, everything comes back and Premiere acts as like our last step.
It's like the hub. It's like it's like the spoke, or like everything else is like a spoke to the wheel, and it's that hubcap right in the middle.
Right, exactly. Everything comes back. Our sound will come back from
Audition, or Logic.
Or we have a gentleman here who does music, Dustin, and he'll write the music. Sometimes he'll actually take our VO or something like that and master it. Everything gets condensed, comes back, and everything is reassembled in Premiere. That way, it's all going out of one place. I know back in the day, especially in like the Final Cut 7 days, which is when I got a lot of my start in editing, stuff would be coming from all over the place. And it could be very, very difficult and very confusing at times to make sure everything was organized and so you knew what you had on hand. Letting it all go through your editor now, the way they design editors these days, editing applications, everything can come through one place and you stay organized. And if you have to go back to your project, you know that it's going to be there.
Yep.
And that's the biggest thing for us because future-proofing yourself, I think, is one of the most important parts of any edit, especially when you're doing client work. Because there will be the day where 6 months down the road or a year down the road, a client comes back and says, hey, do you still have that video? We need to take out Bob because he doesn't work here anymore. and it can be a nightmare going back and opening it up if you didn't prepare for it from the get-go.
Yep.
So always try to do that. That's a big piece of advice that I always like to give is think down the road. Make sure you're not giving yourself or another editor a huge headache in the months or years to come.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Cliff, this has been great.
Awesome.
Hopefully this has been helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
For folks listening. If you want to follow Cliff and get more information about editing, if you want to ask him questions, you can always shoot him up on Twitter. He's at Cliff Bumgardner on Twitter. And it's Bumgardner with a D.
Yes, I'm like a poor gardener, spelled phonetically.
Yes. So follow him there. You can follow me, Peter the Director, on Instagram.
Yep.
A lot of good stuff there. There's a lot of good stuff to come. Again, make sure you subscribe to our channels on YouTube. It's AMZG TV. On iTunes, I don't know. It's just type in the production podcast. Actually, I did. I tested it the other day. If you type in production podcast on iTunes, we're like the only thing that shows up now.
Sweet.
Yeah. So
I thought I was going to have to chant, "We're number 4. We're number 4."
Yeah, no, we're actually like number 1, which is actually, for anybody who doesn't know, that's actually why we started this podcast.
Yeah.
Was we were looking for a podcast to listen to on production, and there was just nothing.
Yeah.
There really wasn't anything out there, and it's great. We've actually seen there's some people who I think I hear might be starting something similar to what we're doing. So
yeah, I'm glad
that's
there's
good.
more out there.
That's good
there's more
because
conversation.
there needs to be. This is a field where the more resources you have, the better your art can be.
Oh, absolutely.
And the better art. Honestly, we're getting feedback from people who listen, who it's helping us to push our art. So thank you, and we're excited about the community that's growing.
Please reach out. We'd love to hear from listeners of the show and from people who are smarter than us or people who are just starting out and need advice. We're always, teaching is the best way to learn. So we're always happy to help.
It is. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. I'm Peter Scheibner.
And I'm Cliff Bumgardner. Until next time, reminding you to craft a story worth hearing.